There is a strange feeling many people carry through life. It doesn't always appear as pain. Often it shows itself as something far more subtle, a quiet restlessness, a sense that something essential is missing, though you cannot say exactly what it is. You may have achieved things others admire, built relationships, worked hard to become someone respectable, and yet in certain moments, late at night during silence, or in the middle of an ordinary day, you feel it again. A hollow space inside you. You might try to fill it with success, with love, with distractions. Sometimes you convince yourself it has finally disappeared, but eventually it returns. The question is, where does this feeling come from? Carl Jung, the pioneer of analytical psychology, believed that many of the deepest patterns shaping our adult lives originate in the earliest relationship we ever experienced. The relationship with our mother. Now, this idea often makes people uncomfortable, because when we hear something like this, we assume the conversation is about blame. It is not. Blame traps us in the past. Understanding, however, sets us free. What Jung discovered was far more profound than the simple idea that childhood affects adulthood. He realized that the mother is not only a person in our lives, she is also a psychological force that shapes the very structure of our inner world. Before we understand language, before we develop memory, before we even know who we are, our psyche is already forming its deepest patterns through this relationship. And when something in that early bond becomes fractured, whether through absence, emotional distance, or subtle misunderstanding, the psyche does something extraordinary. It creates an invisible structure around the wound, a structure that silently shapes how we love, how we fear, and how we see ourselves. Many people spend their entire lives trying to solve problems that originate from this hidden architecture. They search for answers in relationships, achievements, or spiritual practices. But the real key often lies much earlier, in the first emotional mirror we ever looked into, our mother. The first world we ever knew. When a child enters the world, they do not experience themselves as separate from their mother. In the earliest months of life, there is no clear boundary between mère and a. To the infant psyche, the mother is the world. She is warmth, she is safety, she is nourishment. She is the mysterious presence that appears when the child cries and disappears when the child sleeps. In psychological terms, she represents what Jung described as the great mother archetype. This archetype is not merely about one individual woman. It is a universal image embedded deep within the collective unconscious of humanity. Across cultures, myths, and religions, this figure appears again and again. Sometimes she is nurturing and protective. Other times she is dark, overwhelming, and destructive. The ancient Egyptians depicted her in the goddess Isis. In Hindu traditions she appears as Kali or Durga. In Greek mythology we see her reflected in Demeter. These figures represent something primal in the human psyche, the power that gives life, and the power that can take it away. Jung believed that every child encounters this archetype through their relationship with their actual mother, and the way this encounter unfolds becomes the foundation for our psychological development. The two faces of the mother in its pure form. The mother archetype contains two opposing energies. One side represents protection, warmth, and unconditional acceptance. This is the nurturing mother, the presence that makes the child feel welcomed in existence. The one who communicates, often without words, "You are safe here, you belong." But the archetype also has another face, a darker one. This is the devouring or rejecting mother, the force that suffocates, withdraws, overwhelms, or abandons. Every human psyche carries both images. What determines which one becomes dominant is the early emotional environment in which the child grows. When a child consistently experiences warmth, responsiveness, and emotional presence, the psyche internalizes a sense of safety. The child grows up believing the world is fundamentally trustworthy. But when that emotional connection is inconsistent, distant, or absent, something very different happens. The psyche begins to form a defensive structure, not because the child chooses it consciously, but because survival demands it. When the bond becomes fractured, it is important to understand that this fracture does not require dramatic trauma. Sometimes it happens in much quieter ways. A mother struggling with depression, a parent overwhelmed by stress, a household where emotional expression is discouraged, or even a situation where love exists, but the child cannot feel it. In these circumstances, the child senses something confusing. The person who is supposed to represent safety feels emotionally unreachable. For a young mind that depends entirely on that connection, this creates a profound dilemma. The child cannot conclude that the mother is unable to provide emotional security. That realization would be too threatening. Instead, the psyche arrives at a different conclusion. Something must be wrong with me. This belief often forms long before the child has language to express it. It becomes a silent assumption buried deep within the unconscious. And from that point forward, the child begins adapting their behavior in order to preserve the relationship. The birth of the good child. Many children respond to emotional distance by becoming extremely attuned to their environment. They become observant, careful, sensitive to subtle changes in mood. They learn how to avoid conflict, how to please others, how to anticipate emotional needs before they are spoken. From the outside, such children often appear mature beyond their years. Responsible, polite, easy to manage. But internally, something else is happening. The child is slowly learning that their worth depends on performance. Love becomes something that must be earned, not something that simply exists. Over time, this pattern forms the basis of perfectionism, people-pleasing, and chronic self-doubt. The person grows into adulthood believing that if they are good enough, successful enough, or helpful enough, they will finally receive the sense of belonging they missed earlier. Yet the deeper problem remains unresolved, because the original wound was not created by failure. It was created by disconnection, the invisible echo in adult life. As adults, many people are unaware that this early dynamic continues influencing their choices, but its effects appear everywhere. In relationships, it might manifest as intense fear of abandonment, or the opposite, emotional distance and difficulty trusting others. Some individuals become highly dependent on validation. Others insist they need no one at all. Both patterns originate from the same psychological root, a deep uncertainty about whether love is stable. Career paths can also reflect this dynamic. Some people pursue endless achievement as a way of proving their value. They become tireless workers, high performers. But when success finally arrives, the satisfaction is strangely short-lived. The inner void remains, because the goal was never truly about accomplishment. It was about repairing an old emotional fracture, and external success cannot heal an internal wound. Jung's personal encounter with this truth. One reason Jung understood this phenomenon so deeply is that he experienced it himself. As a child, Jung described his mother as possessing two distinct personalities. One was warm and ordinary. The other felt distant and mysterious, almost as if she belonged to another world. At times she seemed present and affectionate. At other times she withdrew into herself. For a sensitive child, this unpredictability created confusion. In his autobiographical writings, Jung admitted that these early experiences profoundly shaped his inner life. He became introspective, drawn toward exploring the hidden layers of the psyche. In many ways, his entire psychological system emerged from this personal search for understanding. His exploration of the unconscious, the shadow, and archetypal forces can be seen as part of a larger quest to understand how early experiences shape the architecture of the human soul, the emotional imprint that remains. When the maternal bond is unstable, the child often develops what psychologists describe as a core emotional imprint. This imprint is not a memory. It is more like a background atmosphere, a subtle expectation about how relationships work. Some people carry an unconscious expectation of rejection. Others anticipate engulfment or control. These expectations influence how we interpret the behavior of others. A neutral comment may feel like criticism. A brief absence may feel like abandonment. Even loving relationships can become complicated by these unconscious reactions. The past quietly filters the present. Without awareness, we may find ourselves recreating familiar emotional patterns again and again. Not because we want to suffer, but because the psyche often gravitates toward what feels psychologically familiar, even when that familiarity includes pain. The turning point, awareness, the first step toward healing, begins with a simple yet profound realization. The patterns you struggle with today may not originate in your present life. They may be echoes of a much earlier emotional environment. Recognizing this truth is not about assigning blame. It is about understanding the origins of your inner world. Once you see the pattern clearly, something important changes. You are no longer unconsciously repeating it. You can begin responding to life from a place of awareness rather than automatic reaction. This is where the journey Jung called individuation truly begins. The process of becoming conscious of the forces shaping your psyche and gradually transforming them. There is a particular kind of wound that is extremely difficult to recognize, not because it is rare, but because it is almost invisible. Many people imagine childhood wounds as dramatic events, abuse, conflict, neglect so obvious that it leaves clear scars. But some of the deepest psychological wounds occur in environments that appear perfectly normal from the outside. The house may have been quiet. Food may have always been on the table. Your mother may have been physically present every day, and yet something essential was missing: her emotional presence. Psychologists sometimes refer to this dynamic as emotional absence. The child grows up with a parent who is physically there, but emotionally unreachable. This does not necessarily mean the mother lacked love. Often she loved her child deeply. But love alone does not always translate into emotional availability. A mother who is overwhelmed by depression, anxiety, unresolved trauma, or chronic stress may find it difficult to connect emotionally with her child. She may appear distant, preoccupied, sometimes exhausted in ways that the child cannot understand. To an adult observer, this might simply look like a tired parent struggling with life. But to a young child, it can feel like something far more confusing, because children instinctively seek emotional mirroring. When they laugh, they look to see someone smiling back. When they cry, they search for a face that responds with comfort. Through these moments of emotional reflection, the child begins forming a sense of self. It is as if the parent's eyes act as a mirror in which the child learns who they are. But when that mirror is dim or absent, the child is left in a strange psychological space. They are expressing emotions, but no one seems fully present to receive them. Over time, the child begins to draw a silent conclusion. My feelings must be too much. My needs must be inconvenient. My presence must somehow create distance. These beliefs are rarely spoken aloud. In fact, the child may never consciously think them, but the nervous system absorbs them, and slowly the child adapts. When emotional connection feels uncertain, many children begin modifying their behavior, not consciously, but instinctively. They become quieter, more careful, less expressive. They begin monitoring the emotional atmosphere of the household with remarkable sensitivity. Long before they understand language fully, they develop the ability to sense tension in a room. They notice small shifts in tone, subtle facial expressions, the slightest sign of irritation or fatigue, and gradually, they begin adjusting themselves to maintain harmony. In some cases, the child becomes unusually responsible. They try to make life easier for their parent. They comfort others instead of seeking comfort themselves. Psychologists sometimes describe this phenomenon as parentification. The child unconsciously assumes emotional responsibilities that normally belong to the adult. Instead of being cared for, they become the caretaker. But there is a quiet cost to this adaptation. Because when a child constantly adjusts themselves to protect another person's emotional state, they begin losing contact with their own. Their feelings become secondary, their needs become negotiable. Their authenticity slowly retreats beneath a carefully constructed personality. And years later, this child grows into an adult who may struggle with something difficult to explain. They feel responsible for everyone else's emotions, but strangely disconnected from their own. One of the most fascinating aspects of the human psyche is its tendency to repeat unresolved emotional experiences. Carl Jung observed that what remains unconscious within us does not disappear. Instead, it continues influencing our behavior in subtle ways, often guiding us towards situations that resemble earlier emotional patterns. This is why many people find themselves in relationships that feel strangely familiar, even when those relationships bring discomfort. The psyche is not necessarily seeking happiness, it is seeking resolution. If a person grew up feeling emotionally unseen, they may unconsciously gravitate toward partners who are distant or unavailable. Not because they consciously desire rejection, but because the dynamic feels psychologically recognizable. The mind attempts to solve the old puzzle again. Perhaps this time, it hopes the outcome will be different. But without awareness, the pattern usually repeats. This is how childhood wounds quietly shape adult relationships. Some individuals develop anxious attachment. They fear abandonment and constantly seek reassurance. Others develop avoidant patterns. They maintain emotional distance and resist vulnerability. From the outside, these behaviors may seem opposite. But psychologically, they originate from the same early uncertainty about emotional safety. Both patterns reflect a nervous system that learned, very early in life, that closeness carries risk. Another common expression of the mother wound appears in the pursuit of external validation. Many people become highly driven. They excel academically. They build impressive careers. They constantly strive to prove their worth, but beneath this ambition often lies a quiet emotional motivation, a desire to finally feel enough. If a child grew up sensing that love depended on performance, the adult may continue chasing achievements as a substitute for emotional security. Each accomplishment brings a brief sense of relief, but the feeling rarely lasts, because the deeper question remains unanswered. Am I worthy simply for existing? Until this question is addressed internally, no amount of external success can permanently resolve the feeling of inadequacy. This is why some of the most successful individuals still struggle with deep insecurity. Their achievements are real, but the emotional wound existed long before those achievements began. Another aspect that Jung and later psychologists recognized is that early emotional experiences are not stored only as thoughts. They are stored in the body. The nervous system learns patterns of safety and danger long before the rational mind develops. If a child repeatedly experiences emotional uncertainty, their body may remain in a subtle state of vigilance. They become highly sensitive to rejection. Criticism feels overwhelming. Conflict triggers intense anxiety. Even in calm environments, the body may still anticipate emotional threat. This is why healing childhood wounds cannot occur purely through intellectual understanding. Insight is valuable, but deeper transformation often requires reconnecting with the emotional and bodily layers where the original imprint was formed. At some point in life, many people begin noticing these repeating patterns, perhaps through therapy, perhaps through a relationship that exposes hidden fears, or sometimes through quiet reflection during periods of loneliness or transition. This moment of awareness can feel unsettling, because it challenges long-held beliefs about identity. You may realize that many behaviors you thought were simply part of your personality are actually adaptations formed in childhood. But this realization is not something to fear. It is the beginning of psychological freedom, because once a pattern becomes conscious, it no longer controls you in the same unconscious way. You can begin observing your reactions instead of automatically acting on them. You can question old beliefs, and gradually you can build new emotional experiences that reshape the internal world. This process takes time, sometimes years, but it marks the true beginning of healing. He called this figure the anima. This does not refer to femininity in a social or cultural sense. Rather, it is a psychological principle. The anima represents a man's capacity for emotional depth, creativity, intuition, and connection to the unconscious. But here is the crucial point. The first face this inner feminine takes is almost always shaped by the man's relationship with his mother. In early childhood, the mother becomes the primary embodiment of the feminine psyche. Through her, the child learns what emotional closeness feels like. Through her, he learns whether the feminine is nurturing or unpredictable, safe or overwhelming. If the relationship with the mother is stable and emotionally supportive, the anima develops in a balanced way. The man grows into adulthood capable of intimacy, empathy, and emotional expression. But when the maternal bond carries pain, absence, or confusion, the anima often becomes distorted. And this distortion can shape a man's relationships for the rest of his life. Some men respond by unconsciously searching for their mother in every romantic partner they encounter. At the beginning of the relationship, They idealize the woman completely. She appears perfect, almost magical. But eventually reality intervenes. The woman reveals her own limitations, her own individuality, and the illusion collapses. The man becomes disappointed, confused, sometimes even resentful. What he does not realize is that he was never relating to the woman herself. He was relating to the unconscious image of his mother. Jung referred to this phenomenon as projection. The psyche projects unresolved inner material onto other people. And until those projections are recognized, relationships become stages where the past continues replaying itself. Other men react to the maternal wound in the opposite way. Instead of seeking emotional closeness, they avoid it. They become emotionally guarded, detached. Sometimes they pride themselves on independence. But beneath this distance often lies a hidden fear. The fear that emotional intimacy will eventually lead to disappointment or loss. In both cases, the unresolved maternal imprint continues, shaping how the man relates to women. Healing begins when he learns to separate the inner feminine archetype from the actual women in his life. When that separation occurs, something remarkable happens. Relationships become less about fulfilling unconscious expectations and more about genuine connection. For women, the psychological dynamic with the mother unfolds in a different, but equally complex way. While a son relates to his mother as the first image of the feminine, a daughter encounters her mother as a reflection of what she herself might become. In many ways, the mother becomes the daughter's earliest model of womanhood. Through her, the daughter absorbs unconscious messages about identity, self-worth, and femininity. If the mother embodies confidence and emotional presence, the daughter often internalizes a sense of stability within her own identity. But when the mother struggles with unresolved pain, control, or emotional distance, the daughter's development can become complicated. One possible outcome is rejection of the maternal model. The daughter distances herself psychologically from her mother. She may emphasize intellect, independence, or achievement as a way of establishing separation. On the surface, this independence can appear strong and admirable, but sometimes it hides a deeper conflict. The daughter may unconsciously fear becoming like her mother, so she constructs an identity defined by opposition. Another possibility is the opposite pattern. Instead of rejecting the maternal identity, the daughter may over-identify with it. She absorbs her mother's emotional patterns, limitations, and unfulfilled dreams. Without realizing it, she begins living a life shaped by someone else's unresolved story. In this situation, her own authentic identity remains hidden beneath inherited expectations. Jung believed that psychological maturity requires a gradual separation from these unconscious identifications, not through rebellion or rejection, but through awareness. A woman must eventually ask herself a difficult question. Which parts of my identity truly belong to me, and which parts were unconsciously inherited? This process can feel unsettling, because it requires examining emotional loyalties that formed very early in life. But it also creates the possibility of discovering something powerful, a sense of self that exists beyond the shadow of the maternal relationship. At this point, many people encounter a dangerous misunderstanding. They begin believing that healing requires blaming their parents. Modern self-help culture often encourages this perspective. It suggests that identifying childhood wounds must lead to resentment. But Jung warned strongly against this approach. Blame may provide temporary emotional release, but it also creates a psychological prison. When we remain focused on blaming another person, we remain tied to them. Our emotional energy continues orbiting around the past. Jung believed the real task of psychological development is something far more difficult. It is the process of reclaiming the parts of ourselves that were shaped by early experiences, not denying them, not projecting them onto others, but integrating them into conscious awareness. Your mother, like every human being, was also shaped by forces beyond her control. She too was once a child. She too inherited emotional patterns from previous generations. Understanding this does not excuse harmful behavior, but it does provide perspective. Because healing is not about rewriting the past, it is about transforming your relationship with it. The moment you stop waiting for the past to change is the moment your true freedom begins. So what does healing actually look like? If the original wound formed in early childhood, how can it possibly be repaired decades later? Jung believed the answer lies in developing a new relationship with the self. Specifically, learning to cultivate the qualities that were once missing in the maternal relationship. In other words, becoming your own inner mother. This idea may sound abstract at first, but its meaning is surprisingly practical. It involves learning how to treat your own emotions with patience rather than judgment, to recognize vulnerability not as weakness, but as a natural human condition, to create moments of self-care and emotional safety within your own life. Many people discover that their inner voice resembles the critical tone they once encountered externally. It may say things like, "You're not good enough. You should be doing more. You're falling behind." Your part of healing involves transforming this inner dialogue, gradually replacing harsh self-criticism with understanding and compassion, not through forced positivity, but through consistent awareness. Over time, the psyche begins to internalize a new emotional environment, one where safety does not depend entirely on external validation, but arises from within. Jung referred to the ultimate goal of psychological development as individuation. This word describes the lifelong process of becoming fully yourself, not the self shaped by unconscious wounds, not the self constructed solely to please others, but the deeper, authentic self that exists beneath those adaptations. Individuation requires confronting the hidden aspects of the psyche, the fears, the unresolved emotions, the patterns inherited from childhood. At first, this confrontation can feel uncomfortable, but it also carries a profound reward, because every layer of awareness brings greater freedom. The past no longer defines the future. Old emotional scripts gradually lose their power, and the individual begins experiencing life from a place of wholeness rather than compensation. Understanding the truth about the mother wound is not meant to burden you. It is meant to liberate you. It reveals that many of the struggles you carry were not personal failures. They were adaptations to early emotional environments, and once those patterns become visible, they can begin to change. You stop searching endlessly for someone to fill an ancient void. You stop repeating relationships that mirror the past. Instead, you begin the slow and courageous process of building a new inner foundation, one based on awareness, self-compassion, and authenticity. This journey is not easy, but it may be the most important journey you ever take, because in the end, the goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become whole, and wholeness begins the moment you turn inward and finally meet yourself.